Welcome to day 4 of the Star Wars Collecting Track panels. So at the end of today at 5 o'clock, we're going to give out the remaining Star Tots. So if you missed any at any panels, I encourage you to line up. Actually, people will probably start lining up before 5, just as a tip. And we will give out Star Tots until we run out. And we have extras of every single one of them. So if there are any you're missing, you could complete your set if you come here just before 5 today when we wrap up the panels. So I want to introduce our speakers. They have a really interesting topic. When collectors, begin, they a lot of times ask a lot of questions, and one of the first pieces of advice I always give collectors is to read up on collecting from various authors and learn from what's been written about before. But not only as a beginner, even advanced collectors, pretty much every advanced collector I know has this great library of books that they have to really learn about this hobby. It's a very rich and vast hobby with a lot of specialized knowledge and a lot of broad knowledge. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers, Chris Logley and Daryl Whitlow.
Thank you.
Thanks. So thanks for joining us. Just so you guys know, this is a book panel about reference books, not about collector's editions of fiction, stuff like that. So if you're confused by that, I'm sorry, but this is about reference material, price guides, things like that. So to most longtime collectors, we remember an age when, there was no internet. We had to gain knowledge some other way, and starting out, best way to do that was books and magazines. So we had to gather the information, and what started out as kind of simple advertising material eventually evolved into these nice articles and these full colored books. Even today, with the internet, many collectors still value the volumes of books that they can collect. And we're completists. We like to have that touch and feel moment of touching the book. So we've kind of identified 3 areas of collecting books, kind of generations we call them. Not everything fits in a particular category, but kind of the first category you can see is price guides and promotional materials. These are your earliest books that they had. Then we kind of moved into the history and production, kind of behind the scenes of how the books were made. And then later on, people started to get more into the third generation of more focused, focused on a toy company, a toy line in particular, or, a country of origin. There's been books about, Argentina and France and Spain, and there's all sorts of those out there. So enough about generations of book. There are some that kind of fit into that outer rim too that don't really fit into any category. So our first generation, I'm going to hand over to Chris here.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. And I'm going to do my best. You can tell my voice is a little croaky, so and it's time to go home when you sound like this and when you've gone through your budget. So it's kind of fun to conclude our day here today with this panel. So Generation 1, as Daryl kind of alluded to, we've got price guides, promotional materials, and we're just going to highlight a few of those items because we wanted to really save time for some of the more current resources, but give you that flavor of history out there. One item, a great item and a great reference, our Kenner Toy Fair catalogs. Some of you may have those in your collections. They're just a wealth of resources to look at those. Those were catalogs that Kenner would have at Toy Fair that would be distributed to licensees, or pardon me, not licensees, but to buyers at Toy Fair, and you see oftentimes early images of figures. You see figures that perhaps changed somewhat from their ultimate as photographed in the Toy Fair catalogs to what was produced. The Sears Wish books, we can all kind of maybe remember some of those and think about flipping through those when we were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. Looking at the different assortments, and I can vividly remember circling different things or kind of dog-earing the pages of certain things I wanted to show mom and dad. And those are fun to go back and look at, and is a great resource to even today to see what was offered in which season, which assortments were offered, because as some of you may be collectors of the way, for example, that they were sold through Sears or through retail, some of the figure multi-packs that were offered. So it's fun to kind of go back and, if you, for a display purpose, pair up maybe an item from your collection with something from that.
Also the pricing.
The pricing. Yeah, the pricing If only we had that time machine, right? Some early price guides as well. We've got one featured on the next page, but kind of this early generation was more geared toward price guides, or that was kind of how some of these collecting books were initially structured. Because there wasn't necessarily the demand for information and details that we all have now and want to learn more about particular lines of toys, particular releases in different international markets and things of that nature. So it was, price guides were a very common early publication. We'll look at one of those in a second. And then a really amazing publication, Toy Shop magazine. I'm curious, is there anyone in here that subscribed to Toy Shop back in the day? Okay, so maybe, okay, yeah, okay, hand in the back, obviously, great. Well, Toy Shop for a while, what it was a magazine, a newspaper-style, oversized magazine publication, and was really the backbone of the collecting hobby kind of in the late 80s. I believe it started 1988, 89 is kind of the early era of when you start seeing Star Wars items appearing in Toy Shop. And Toy Shop was strictly a buy and sell publication, folks placing ads or running auctions by mail. It's kind of crazy to think about that now, auctions by mail, when you submit your bids and participate in an auction that way. We're now all in the eBay era and the era of Facebook sales and things like that, where things happen instantaneously. That era was the era of the pen, the paper, and the stamp to participate in an auction. So one thing that was unique about Toy Shop, a lot of collectors, it was offered different ways in which you could receive it because it came through the mail. So many collectors would pay for the earliest available delivery, for example, UPS Next Day Air, because when they would look at these ads and see perhaps a unique item they wanted, a prototype, perhaps a display or some other item, they would call that phone number, and they'd want to be the first one to have the latest edition of Toy Shop in their hands so they could flip through those pages and as we might say, kind of cherry pick or look for that one item they're looking for to add to their collection. So it was very common for collectors to pay for UPS Next Day Air, even back in that era, to kind of have first crack at that publication when it hit the mailboxes or the front porch. And things would come and go very quickly through Toy Shop. So, you might get it on the same day that, Daryl and I might get it on the same day, and if we're looking for the same thing, if he calls the retailer first, then, I'm out of luck. So it's kind of a different era. It's kind of like the buy it now era, I guess, of what we think of on eBay, but this is, a publication through the mail. So kind of a really fun thing to look at. And the reason I've kind of lingered on this and talked about it is Chris Dragolius, a longtime Star Wars collector in the vintage hobby, has archived a number of these Toy Shop publications, and he would clip out and save certain ads or certain auctions that were advertised. And if you go on Google, if you want to see more about this, if you just search Chris Dragolius Toy Shop scrapbook, it'll come up. And he's got it organized kind of by topic and different things by which it was offered. And the scrapbook, just to be clear, it doesn't encompass every Star Wars thing that was ever listed in there. He kind of just highlighted certain things that were unique or prototypes or maybe things that had appeared in Toy Shop for the first time. So it's kind of a fun thing. Even if you're not maybe a big vintage collector, Google it and check it out sometime. It's kind of fun to look at that other era because now in this Facebook era, things are so dramatically different. So if we want to look at kind of what one of those early price guides look like, and one of the first real collector books that both Daryl and I are aware of, and we'd be curious if someone else is aware of something else, but in our research and in our collections and our reference libraries, this 1983, the official price guide to Star Trek and Star Wars collectibles. So I like to think if that was published now, with the popularity of Star Wars, maybe Star Wars would come first in the title. At that era, Star Trek was obviously tremendously popular, and the films were still in active release. So House of Collectibles published it. It's a paperback, and it's kind of a smaller. It's not necessarily one of these size volumes, but it's smaller than this, the initial publication. And it was published. There were 6 editions of that published.
Yeah,
correct?
well, I think the last edition actually is Star Wars and Star Trek.
Oh, good. Okay, so it had overtaken it by the last edition. I didn't know that. So, and now Daryl's. That's kind of just a little brief overview of Generation 1. We don't want to linger too much, and Daryl's going to talk now, kind of bring us up timeline to Generation 2.
So Generation 2 deals more with the history and production process of getting your toys. As you might have guessed, this generation starts with one of the most beloved books in any Star Wars library, which is Steve Sansweet's From Concept to Screen to Collectible. There might have been some early articles in magazines that predate this book, but this was really the beginning of many collectors starting to really research the book. and the toy process. This book was released in 1992 and initially was available in both soft cover and hardcover. It truly walked you through the concept of how a production of the toys were made, all the way from the concept of the movie to getting the toys in their final forms. Kind of gave many people their first glimpse of what a prototype and a wax sculpt is, kind of there on the lower left, and also kind of featured Star Tots, which if you're waiting for the end of the panel, kind of has that feel to it there on the right.
And then one thing, if I could just interject, I mean, the book was revolutionary because it's the first time that many Star Wars fans or collectors had ever seen any of these type of items, prototypes or figures in the stages of production. So it was literally absolutely revolutionary when that was published to see some of these things. We're all familiar with kind of the figures and the card backs, the vehicles and the boxes, but to see some of these other items, other concepts, unproduced concepts, for example, like Star Tots, it was an unbelievable resource, and it's a highly still sought after book.
Oh yeah, many people still
to get it. And I would say, again, essential to any reference library.
Okay, and so that kind of spawned other people thinking about this history process. So then a lot of the magazines that were around at the time kind of started focusing on this. So the first one was Star Wars Galaxy, not necessarily the first one, but one of the main ones that centrally focused on Star Wars was Star Wars Galaxy magazine. There's kind of two editions of this, or I would call. The initial run was called Star Wars Galaxy Magazine. It ran for 13 issues, and then it got switched to Star Wars Galaxy Collector Magazine. The first series kind of featured a little bit more on behind the scenes of what was going on in the movies. And then once 1998 hit, after The Phantom Menace hit, kind of really looked more towards more of the actual collecting aspect. Many of the authors of these magazines are still involved in the collecting track today. Gus, Duncan, Chris Georgulius, C.J. Fawcett, Todd Chamberlain. There's a ton of people that contributed to this magazine. I think Sansweet was maybe an editor or something, or kind of looked through the process and everything. So then next we had other magazines that kind of took on this persona. They weren't necessarily Star Wars focused, but there's a lot of Star Wars content in there. So you had, Tomart's was earlier, Lee's action figure, and Toy Fair kind of came a little bit later. So Tomart's was a publication. I still can't find out if they are still printing or not. I've asked several people, kind of looked around, can't really find anything, can't find a definitive end date for them. So they started in 1991. Had several great articles. One of their best articles was actually called The Kenner Legacy. And so they kind of took the actual process and how Kenner started and where it, how they got the license and everything like that, not just for Star Wars, but the entire Kenner line. And so they have then that was in the magazine, and I think it is, let me find out.
Well, and I would also just say, if you're a toy collector of that era or enjoyed other Kenner products, Superpowers line, we could name a different number of products. That series, it's spectacular. I would highly encourage you to go out and see if you can track down copies. They're out there. I can't, if you enjoy the history of Kenner in general, in particular, we're fans or have memories of collecting those other toy lines beyond Star Wars, it's again a great resource.
Yeah, because it goes into Strawberry Shortcake, Batman of the 90s, everything. And if you're particularly interested in the Star Wars, it's the first 8 issues. Actually 7, because the 8th issue is droids, and it's kind of more the unproduced droids that never got made. So you're actually looking for Kenner Legacy is in issues 145 through 151, and then 155 through 158. They kind of skipped a few times in there. But if you're just looking not necessarily for the articles, but you want some more of the actual kind of photos and everything, then we go to the Tomart's Price Guide to Worldwide Star Wars Collectibles, and in this they kind of gathered a bunch of the pictures of the unproduced items and stuff, and they added kind of a section in the back of it, slightly different. It comes in softcover and hardcover. The hardcover has this extra section that is focused on the actual pre-production items, not just toys, but it's got 12-inch, it's got the micro, kind of some concepts for what the card backs would look like in that.
And one thing to say about that is if you're interested in that hardback copy, I can tell you that it is on the show floor. I've seen it on the show floor. I know Cantina Collectibles has it.
Yes.
I think there may be other folks out there, but Cantina Collectibles has brand new unread copies of that book, that hardcover. very reasonably priced too.
Yeah.
So if it's something you're interested, maybe check out their booth.
So then, along the same lines, we had Toy Fair magazine. Toy Fair magazine started in 1997, ran for 163 issues. This is the very first. This is a picture of the very first cover. So you can see they started off strong with the good old Battle of Hoth there. It was great because it featured a current price guide for modern. This is where you really got to look at, how the prices were fluctuating on those long sabers and short sabers and long trays and those sorts of variations. The trilogy edition Luke that they gave out at movie theaters. They were all featured in there. They'd even have the one on the right is a little special section on like Japanese collectibles for Star Wars. So it ran a gamut. It also featured. It wasn't just a price guide. It also featured great behind the scenes articles. This is where I first learned about Gentle Giant, Kotobukiya, things like that. It kind of took you through the steps of all of these. So then we're going on to Generation 3, and we're going to kind of split it up a little bit into American and foreign. So I'll hand it over to Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say Generation 3 is where we really see an explosion of different focused and more specialized books. There's certainly more overview books that cover array of aspects of Star Wars collecting, but it's really where we start to see more focused and specialized books, and particularly in the international arena, international releases and focused books on specific international toy lines and licensees in other countries. So if we want to go through this, and obviously we've got limited time, so we can't talk about all the books in a lot of depth, but we certainly want to kind of give an overview so you can see what's out there, and perhaps if you want to look it up after you get home, and track down a book. But frankly, one of the best out there, and Gus and Duncan's Comprehensive Guide to Star Wars Collectibles. This was published in hardcover. It is, it's a thick volume. Daryl can point it out and hold it up right there. And I will just say, if you're a Star Wars collector, and if you can't just sit down and page through that baby for 40 minutes and enjoy it, then you're not looking enough, because the pictures are incredible, incredible listings of products and releases by categories. If you're looking at belt buckles, or if you want to look at patches, or if you want to look at raincoats or skates, it's all in there. It is comprehensive. At the time it was published, it's spectacular. Another book, and again, I would say this: if you enjoy vintage collecting, whether you're into personally collecting prototypes, you don't have to own a prototype to have an appreciation for this. This is another book published by Gus Lopez and Duncan Jenkins through Completist Publications. It's a hardcover book. It's right here in front of center table here in front of the monitor. In terms of content, you can see a little bit how it's laid out, but it is just absolute eye candy to page through that book and look at the prototypes in there from vintage Star Wars. They have wax sculpts, they have hard copies, they have engineering prototypes, paint masters, photo art in there. It's spectacular. If you enjoy prototypes in particular, or just the vintage Star Wars line in general, I cannot recommend that book highly enough. It's again, I would say it's an essential resource if you're a vintage collector. So another book published by Gus and Duncan, if you're into cast and crew items, which is kind of a really cool area of collecting, and a lot of people get into. This is kind of can run the gamut of buttons and patches and coasters and crew T-shirts, perhaps from the film production itself, or even from ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. There's a number of crew gifts that originated from the earliest era of Star Wars, all the way up to the present. And it's to the point now where this book was published a couple years ago, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and particularly with the sequels. Now I'm sure Gus and Duncan could do an incredible update, because I know all the different departments have different gear that they have, creature department, things like that. So it's again another great resource. Then the final one that we'll spotlight from, again, Gus and Duncan's release, if you enjoy the micro collection. This is perhaps of the ones we looked at, they're the most specialized and focused, simply because the micro collection spans such a short period of time in the vintage toy release. So again, this has prototypes, unproduced items included in there as well, with the different lines, but the releases of Death Star World, Hoth World, some of you may remember those, but it was such a limited release in 82, 83. It's a shorter book, about 148 pages, but all full color. Every page is full color. A great reference for photos as well. So keep kind of moving right through here. If you're a vintage collector, and if you enjoy collecting carded vintage, John Kellerman's book, Vintage Action Figures, A Guide for Collectors, is critical. It's very hard to track down. Many of you may know that. I purchased my copy at Celebration 3 in Indianapolis in 2005. I'm not even sure if it had been out a year yet. It was very new at that time. Just a great resource. And what was revolutionary, what John did in this book is he tracked and included a matrix. And on the first slide there, I'll just show you, that's kind of the presentation, how it was offered in a very nice, kind of individual packaged mailer of the book. That's how it was offered and sold. That's the cover of it. And then, Daryl, if we go to the next slide. So this is what a lot of the pages laid out. And at that time, people certainly were aware of the different card backs, 12 backs, 32 backs, and things of that nature. But there was not, I guess, the focused, I guess there was not as widespread of a focus on card backs and variations, offers, special offer stickers. And this was really kind of the cornerstone to reveal that to a lot of the hobby and dial people in on the, if you're a Boss collector, or if, let's just say you're a Vader collector, there's not just one vintage offering out there if you want to collect Vader, and particularly in the different Star Wars releases, multiple different card backs. So this is a highly prized copy, or highly prized book and edition. It's very hard to find on the secondary market these days, and to find one in new or like new condition, you'd be able to, I don't even be prepared to pay, I would say.
About $300 now?
Upwards of $300 at this point. That's just where the market's at on this book. It's just incredible. So again, this era had much more specialized books in this Generation 3. So, the Star Tots that many of you may have received already from the Power of the Force line came with the small coin, and that's a callback to the original vintage Power of the Force line, of course, that came packaged with an aluminum coin. And James Gallo, Mark Salati, and then Jeff Carell did the artwork and the layout for a great book, Coining a Galaxy. I talked to Mark. Mark's here. He's from Australia. I spoke with him the other day. I knew the book's been long sold out, and I asked him, I said, when did it sell out? He said it sold out within a couple years of release. So this is still available. You can still track it down. I did see a couple copies out on the show floor as I walked around. And if you're into coins, again, just an absolute great resource to have. So again, kind of in the pre-production era, we have Matthias's book, A New Proof. And this book focuses solely on proof cards, chromolines, the packaging of the vintage action figures and play sets, particularly from, or exclusively from, rather, the Star Wars release. And you'll see some of the layout and kind of how it's produced. Just the photo art, it's amazing to see some of these pieces. And just to be clear, these aren't pieces from one person's collection. This was a project that Matthias undertook and photographed from a whole range of Star Wars collectors to compile this information into one single publication. It's amazing. This was published and came out in 2015. I think it debuted right around the time of Celebration Anaheim, if I recall correctly, if any of you were in Anaheim. I picked up my copy there from Matthias, and I believe he is now sold out, is my understanding.
Yes,
is that right?
from what I understand, yeah.
And just recently sold out, I think, last fall, or maybe had found a few other copies. But again, you can find it from other folks that offer it out there. But again, another great book. So
I think he is working on a second edition, but no word on that yet. We're not sure.
You want to jump in on some of these?
Yeah. So this next one is Star Wars: The Action Figure Archive by Steve Sansweet. This kind of focuses solely on the both Kenner and Hasbro runs of the 3 3/4 inch line. It goes through every variation release that was done figure-wise. Now, if it's a different card back but the same figure, it doesn't change, but it has a nice, almost life-size, full-size picture of each character on the page, and it gives. So if you're looking for those loose figures, you can kind of track every figure you get. So then we have Mark Belomo's Ultimate Guide to Vintage Action Figures. It does a nice job of highlighting the figures and play sets, specifically the play sets. It kind of goes through every little piece that was in there, so you can track. If you're looking for that Cantina Adventure set or a TIE Fighter, what stickers did it have, the battle damage, which ones am I looking for, things like that. Kind of go through every iteration. Next, we have kind of another Sansweet, the Ultimate Action. This is I'm sorry, I got the two mixed up. The first Sansweet goes through and has kind of large pictures, mainly focuses on Kenner, but does have some sort of modern Hasbro in it.
Yes.
And so it's a nice paperback. A lot of people use it, kind of track their collection. This is the one that has the little 3 3/4 inch. Sorry about that.
Yep, and it's this copy that appears right
Yes.
here, actually. Yeah, paperback. And again, it's just amazing when you flip through here. You can see all the figures is organized by character. So you flip to a page and you see Newt Gunray, you see Luke Skywalker. Obviously, Luke's got a few more pages than Newt Gunray does in the book, but it's just an amazing book, and again, organized by figure.
I'm getting confused by Steve's books. He's written too many.
Yeah,
so.
that's right.
So then another Steve Sansweet book, Star Wars: 1,000 Collectibles, memorabilia from stories from a galaxy far, far away. Kind of really goes through Rancho Obi-Wan and some of the kind of funky things he's been given or found in his travels over time. Then he also has the Treasures of Rancho Obi-Wan, kind of the same thing. It has a lot of those kind of kitschy, weird collectibles.
Yeah, just it's unique to flip through. Some of it's fan made, some of it are item, and they're literally from around the globe. It's this hardcover copy here. This book debuted, I believe, at Celebration Orlando, if I recall, or it may have been Anaheim. I could be off on my years, but it was tied to the display that they had at that particular celebration. Skateboards. They feature the different cakes they've got there, unproduced figures. I don't know if anybody remembers Celebration 4 when Steve wore the Ewok costume at the opening ceremony in Los Angeles. So it's got it's got a photo of that costume in there. He came out wearing that costume. So this is a fun one, but it's inspired by the Force, Star Wars fan artifacts and art. And it's just an incredible, just to look and see the creativity and the passion that so many fans have for Star Wars. And Steve's given so many things by fans over the years, and this is just a kind of a small sampling of what you see at Rancho Obi-Wan.
And you can pick that up here at the show floor in the Rancho Obi-Wan booth as well.
That's right.
Sorry to be an ad for everybody, but if it's available, we want to thank them.
Yeah,
so.
we thank them and let you know if you're interested. A lot of it's out there on the show floor.
So then we have the Philip Reed series. He's got a website called Battle Grip. He's done about 6 or 7 of these books, ranging. Some of them are focused, like he's got a Shadows of the Empire focused book. They're a smaller book, probably less than 100 pages or so, I guess. They're all hardcover. He slowly works through the process. His latest ones have been about toy advertisements. He's done carrying cases. I'm trying to think what else.
Yeah, and these have all been done on Kickstarter. At least these have been all Kickstarter releases.
Yeah, but a lot of times when he offers a new Kickstarter on his book, he'll include some of the older books. So if you're looking for those, kind of keep an eye on him.
And we started with one of those early books from 1983, and here is literally the most current book, Engineering an Empire: The Creators of Kenner Star Wars Toys. And this is a release by, you see the 3 gentlemen's names up there, Gary, Matt, and Stephen. This book is available on the show floor at the at the Lone Star Star Wars Collectors Club, because the 2 gentlemen are from Texas. It's hardcover. It's brand new. It's been released and debuting here at Celebration, so we kind of wanted to feature that. If it's something you want to look at after the fact, the website is engineeringanempireBook.com. And if you have interest in the vintage Kenner, it's kind of an amazing profile. And again, it just got released here, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But flipping through it, I'll just tell you, it looks spectacular. Profiles on a lot of the people that worked in the design and the tooling, the production. Just an amazing kind of, I guess, mini history of what took place at Kenner in that era that we all love so much.
So next we're going to more foreign. These were released by Fantasia. They're German. They are bilingual, so you get the German and the English in the books. Kind of that upper left one is Star Heroes. So that actually includes a small section in the back on Star Trek as well, but it's probably 90% Star Wars. And then the bottom right is more focused on Star Wars. Basically, they're the same publication, same company, just depending on what they're included in a little bit back. Here's kind of an example of some internal pages. It's a great way to track foreign card variations, not just the old Kenner on the left, but actually the modern Hasbro lines. They feature, if it's German, if it's American, if it's Palitoy, all sorts of different things, both loose and carded featured in it. Then we have Irwin Toys, which is the Canadian Star Wars connection. Kind of goes through the differences between the American releases and the Canadian releases. Particularly, has a little section, has a little history section at the front. Kind of on the lower left, you see those vacuum-formed figures that were released in Canada. Also kind of goes through some packaging variations throughout. Has nice little sections on some old toy ads and stuff like that, only available in Canada. Kind of they had Sears up there, but then they also had some specific Canadian companies that they offered kind of the same sort of wish book through, so you can kind of see what was offered. Palatoy Death Star up at the top right, which wasn't available here. And then next is French. Stefan has published several books. First one was in 2006, Meccano to Trilogo. Kind of looked at the variations available in cardbacks, in the 3-packs. They did the Max Rebo band in a box instead of a bubble package, and also takes you in the back kind of some magazines that they had, as well as some promo advertising, food advertising and stuff for their items in French. Then next he has more of a history of the French. This deals more with how it came to be, how it hit theaters, different things like that. All through the posters and everything that showed up in the French publication of Star Wars and getting the word out there. Then he did kind of a mini collector's handbook. This is really kind of a pocket-sized handbook. It features each character in particular, what card backs they were on in by the Meccano company. You can see kind of the small square cards that Meccano are known for at the beginning. Then they switched to the Tri-Logo, and it kind of has a rarity index, so you can kind of see, is this available? How much, kind of gives you an idea of how much you might have to pay for it if it's one of those real rare figures. Then Stefan's been a busy guy writing books. He also has the 40 Years of French Culture. This one kind of focuses more on things, there's several authors along with Stefan, and they kind of pick and chose their favorite items throughout the years. So starting, back in the 70s and 80s with the figures, all the way up and through the modern stuff, the hamburger promotion that they had over there. It was actually a black hamburger that you could buy with a black bun and stuff. And it sounds kind of disgusting, but they were very popular. So it kind of walks you through their kind of favorite times through the years of their favorite collectibles. Then Daniel Segovia wrote Guerra Estelar. There's 2 editions. The first edition there on the top is in Spanish. I believe it's Spanish. I can't read it actually, so I'm not positive. You can kind of make it out a little bit if you know some Spanish, so I hope that's what it is. Guerra Estelar 2 is in English, and I know that Guerra Estelar 1 is coming out in an English edition. You can currently buy it. You can search for these on Facebook. It's the best way to find him. Here's kind of some inside editions of what they have. This is the first book. Kind of talks about, there weren't a lot of toys down there, so it's more about the movie promotions. And I mean, they're talking like collecting ticket stubs and stuff from Argentina, and it deals, from what I can make out of what I have read, it kind of talks about the political aspects of how that influenced the pricing and stuff at the time. So then here's some more. This is the second edition, kind of talks. Second edition isn't just Argentina, it goes all of South America. So it's got model trim, it's got toll toys, and kind of goes through, same thing with some collectors kind of picking out some choice pieces. Then last year we had the unboxing convention down in Mexico. So there's an ID guide to Lili Ledy figures that was there at the convention. Same thing. It focuses only on Lili Ledy figures from the Lili Ledy factory. Kind of gives you how to identify the variations and everything. Next we have Spain by Javier. It's a PBP POC company. It kind of focuses on the variations, how to identify what figures came from that country. There's a lot of COO variant collectors out there in the hobby anymore, and it kind of walks you through all of those. I believe there is a second edition of this one coming out. The cover has an X-Wing fighter on it, so I think they're going to go more into maybe whatever, ships and everything were also by the PBP and POC factory. Next, we have these are from Japan, Hobby Japan. These are more a magazine style. There's 6 editions in this, 6 volumes. It's called the Action Figure Database. Kind of along the lines of Kellerman. Volume 1 deals with all vintage, and it is the most sought after. It regularly goes for about $150 to $200, and it's a thick magazine size. Walks you through. Once again, if you can't read Japanese, you're going to be out of luck, but it's got some nice pretty pictures in there. So here's the first 3 editions. As I said, the first one deals with all vintage, and then they can kind of walk you through each time period. It's always stated directly on the magazine which time period it looks at, so it can kind of keep track, and so you know which one you're actually getting. It also has some kind of weird variants in the back that they talk about, so it's a good way to track those. And then kind of last one here is the George Lucas exhibition. It was more a museum catalog. Once again, it's in Japanese, but once again, it has some great photography, kind of collectibles that they had over in Japan at the time for you to look at. So that kind of leads us into an outer rim area.
Yeah, I think we wouldn't. It's worth touching on some of these items from this outer rim because there's items that certainly impact collecting and elements of collecting that may not necessarily be dedicated on a particular subject per se. But if you're interested in storyboards or the production and the work that was done with ILM, the production of the films, the storyboard book is a great book. Auction catalogs are oftentimes a great resource to look at. Again, great eye candy to look at some perhaps original props. Toy auction catalogs are a great resource to have, and I know Daryl has a bunch in his library, his reference library, and I do as well. And then on the right there, we've got a picture of one of the celebration guides from a recent celebration. Of course, they had one for this celebration, and it often has interesting information both about celebration, and it contains articles kind of looking back sometimes at past celebrations or particular areas of collecting. So
yeah, it's a good way to, like this one has the art that was included at the celebration, so it's a good way to track those. They do have articles. One of these is from Orlando, one of these is Anaheim. So it has, a story on Kenner or a story on Ewok collecting, droids collecting, cartoon collecting, stuff like that. We also have some art books. They did the Vader project. Sideshow had the R2ME project, and they auctioned those off to charity. But this is a good way, if you couldn't afford the helmets or whatever, to kind of look and see what was available. They've got some great pictures in there. So that kind of does it for the outer rim, unless there's some more that you want to talk about.
No, I think that
auction
covers,
catalogs.
yeah,
Okay.
the outer rim. Yeah.
So this is kind of our top picks of some figures or some books you might kind of want to look for. This is kind of our not top 10 because there's more than 10, but
yeah, kind of important resources or kind of vital additions you might want to have in your collection. And again, every collector has different interests. Some are more focused than others. Some are more an overview type collector, and in particular, some collectors like vintage, some collectors like modern. So hopefully the panel has given you a flavor of some of the books, some of the resources that are out there that you can then maybe take it back into your collecting going forward. And then I'm going to go ahead and go forward. So these books up here, these aren't just display, and they're not just from our collection or anything like that. These are all books that were donated and that we're going to give away here at the panel today. So we believe it's important to put some resources in collectors' hands. No, that's very nice. Thank you. But don't clap for me. We want you to clap for these great sponsors that donated these books to us. Rancho Obi-Wan donated books. Toy Chamber Collectibles, Todd Chamberlain, he's down there in the hall. Completus Publications, which is Gus and Duncan, donated several books. Cantina Collectibles donated a couple of the Tomarts books. Again, that newest book we mentioned, Engineering and Empire, that debuted here at Celebration, they were generous enough to donate a brand new copy of that book. So we've got some great resources that we're going to be able to put in collectors' hands. And I know you're probably out there thinking, well, how are you going to do this? Well, it's quite simple. When you walked in the room, everyone should have received a bookmark. So if you look at those bookmarks,
and
there should be...
The bookmarks were done by our friend Brian DeGuire, who's an Artist Alley. Go down and check out Brian's artwork. He's got the pod racing print, so you can check out him.
Yep, and he did the artwork on both sides. Daryl's an Emperor focus collector, so that's why one of the sides of the bookmark has the Emperor. The other side has kind of a TFA or sequel trilogy Luke, which is a character I enjoy. So check those bookmarks. If you have a sticker on the Luke side of that bookmark numbered 1 to 14, There's 14 of them out there. If you would just come up to the front of this room, please, as they dismiss, we will pass out the books right up here. And again, if it's not a copy you want, you're free to trade. Obviously, if it's a subject you don't like, we're happy to. You can do what you want with another one. So,
Okay.
thank you very much. We
Thank you.
appreciate you coming today. We hope you learned something. Thank you very much.